panelists and participants. It's an honor to be part of the 20th anniversary of Transforming Transportation. Even though I'm unable to join you in person today, I would like to share with you a few reflections about the importance of decarbonizing transport and the work that we at the Independent Evaluation Group, IEG, have delivered. The World Bank has not conducted a review of its approach to decarbonization. Therefore, IEG sought to help close this knowledge gap through the first of a new IEG product line called Evaluation Insight Notes, or EIN for short. And EIN aims to generate new insights from existing evidence to address knowledge gaps and contribute to enhance operational learning. The Transport Decarbonization EIN was the result of a successful partnership with the Transport Global Practice. Decarbonization is a priority action area under the World Bank's Climate Change Action Plan, since the transport sector emits approximately 24% of the global total of energy-related carbon emissions. Without aggressive measures, the World Bank expects emissions from transport to grow 60% by 2050. The road freight transport, which accounts for a significant part of these emissions, about 30%, is much more carbon intense than freight transport by other modes. For instance, road freight transport can emit more than 100 times as much CO2 as ships to carry the same amount of freight the same distance. Road transport is also a fast-growing sector. 80% of the global increase in diesel consumption can be attributed to trucks. E-commerce and home delivery are two reasons for this growth. Environmentally sustainable transport has been on the World Bank's agenda for over 20 years. Since the late 1990s, the World Bank has emphasized the integration of economic, social, and environmental dimensions in a sustainable transport policy, the importance of sustainable, low-emission transport for both people and freight, especially in urban areas, and the need to support countries in developing sustainable mobility alternatives. The EIM did not specifically focus on road freight transport. However, it showed that the bank has mainly supported interventions that have the potential to shift freight from the road to railways and to a lesser extent to inland waterways. Fewer projects have focused on decarbonizing the urban road freight sector. Projects that support operational efficiency improvements in the road freight transport sector are also rare. Overall, we found that more can be done by the World Bank to exploit opportunities for decarbonization, including in the road freight sector, as the approach has until recently been timid against the needed contribution to the Climate Change Action Plan. The EIN also found that country-specific decarbonization diagnostics and analytical work has been limited, and transport decarbonization seldom makes it into the World Bank's strategic country agenda. In addition, the World Bank has rarely measured transport decarbonization directly. To conclude, I want to say that partnerships such as this one with the Transport GP are very important to IEG in supporting operational learning by informing decision-making processes at different levels in the World Bank to improve programs and activities and responsiveness to key needs and concerns. Many thanks for your attention, and I wish you a fruitful discussion in this crucial topic for a sustainable future for all.
Good afternoon, all. This was a very good introduction, I think, to the topic that we're going to discuss. I'd like to welcome you to the session on decarbonizing road freight. And I think the message that came out, more needs to be done, I think is a very good message, probably not only by the bank. More needs to be done and more can be done. And I think that is what we'll be discussing in this panel. So I'd like to welcome you, and then I'm going to introduce the panel in a minute. And I was wondering if I could have a slide up. Oh, thanks. Because what I'd first like to do maybe is take you on a short journey, and I'd like to call that journey ZEF-wise. Because we all know, in a way, it is very wise to adopt zero-emission vehicle policies and accelerate that transition. And I think, why is it wise? Probably I don't have to sort of articulate that after this morning. It is wise because we need to get in lane for the Paris goals, and currently we're not in lane. So we need to shift lanes, we need to shift gears, and we need to accelerate. And we have to race to zero, or run to zero, or accelerate to zero, but we have to get to zero. So that's the first reason. But next to that, of course, and it was articulated, I think, this morning in very many ways, of course, there is cost benefits, there is health benefits, and there is energy security benefits. So in very many ways, it's very wise, to adopt policies like this. We also know what it takes. So we have a lot of wisdom, to get to those benefits. And there is a lot of appetite with car producers, appetite with fleet owners, and appetite within governments. At least in large parts of Europe, I'm going to make that remark only once, there is that great appetite. In some parts of Europe, there may be some doubt, but we'll see how that plays out. And in a way, we also thought, we have to apply that wisdom maybe also to two crucial issues that we have to overcome and sort of in order to accelerate the uptake of zero-emission vehicles. And you can see it on the slide. It's the investment angle and it's the infrastructure angle. And we feel if you don't sort of get the investments right at scale, and if you don't get the infrastructure rolled out, literally nothing moves. And we want it to move. So therefore, the organizations you see on top of the slide have decided, and this is our official launch, and this is the journey. So we want to invite you on to launch this ZEF-wise series. It's a roadmap of events that you can see specified, and we have some prints out of this if you're interested later on, where we will look into these issues at the many meetings that we'll have across the year. So there is Transforming Transportation, there is the International Transport Forum, the SEM meeting in India, and ultimately we end up at COP28. I think the ambition of the roadmap, the common roadmap of all these organizations that you see listed, is basically, on one hand, to bring probably the finance, the transport, and the energy community closer together to tackle these barriers. And secondly, to land at COP, to arrive at COP with an action sort of package. Time will tell what will be in the package, but the invitation to you is basically join us on this ZEF-wise series. Bring all your wisdom, bring all your questions, bring all your experience to this series, and let's jointly sort of work on this issue. Because we strongly feel more needs to be done. That was already said, I think, in the video by Kama Nonoi, but more also can be done. And what it is that can be done more, I think we're going to discuss with the wonderful panel, and I feel very privileged to have them because they're very knowledgeable on this issue. And I'm going to introduce them in the order that they're sitting. So first of all, there is Jason Mathers. He's a senior director at the Environmental Defense Fund, leading the Zero Emission Truck Initiative work. And we'll sort of hear from him what his experiences are. Then next to him is Jessica Olsen. She's the Vice President of Karlstad. She will tell you more what Karlstad is. I know Karlstad as one of the Netherlands partners, I'm not allowed to say partner in crime by Jessica, but we have been partners in crime, leading the work on the global MOU on zero emission and trucks for medium and heavy duty freight transportation, with now 27 signatories since COP. So that's Jessica Olsen. Next to Jessica is François Daven. He's the Director General of the International Union of Railways. And if you ever get to visit him, I can tell you he has the best office in whole Paris with an amazing view of the Eiffel Tower. So that alone is a reason to visit him. But of course, also, there is great issues to be discussed around the role of railways in transport decarbonization. So next to Francois is Christoph Wolff. He's the CEO of the Smart Freight Center in the amazing city of Amsterdam. Also worth visiting. It's almost a Netherlands promotion now. Sorry for that. But Christoph knows a lot about, as you already noticed in the earlier panel contribution, about freight decarbonization in a far broader sense, but also knows a lot about freight transportation. And then last but not least is Zhang Zhen. She's the director of the China EV100 Hydrogen Center, and she will speak to the experience in China with the application of hydrogen. So what we aim to do is I'm going to ask the panelists a question. They will respond. So probably I'll give them 4 to 5 minutes for that. I asked the panelists to be brief and stick to that time. There is a timekeeper and she's very strict, so please help me out with that. And then maybe after that first round, I'm going to see if there is any questions online or whether there's any questions from the floor, and then we take it from there. I also have a second round of questions if we still have time. So maybe let me begin with that, and then I'll begin in this order. So Jason, you've sort of led the work in North America on your trucking, zero emission trucking initiative. So can you share with us sort of the lessons that you learned about the obstacles that we have to overcome and how those lessons would apply maybe at a more global scale?
Yeah, thank you, Herman. EDF's been working with large and small fleets for well over 25 years, really focused on electrification for most of this last decade. There are 3 conditions that fleets need in order to be able to scale battery electric vehicles, right? And that is they need access to vehicles that meet their needs. The vehicles need to have a compelling business case, and they need timely and cost-efficient charging options, right, that meet their operations. As we think about, there's obviously a lot of barriers, but really all the barriers come back to just setting those conditions. In our work, I think there's kind of 3 insights that I want to share around kind of setting those conditions. So the first one is just the critical role of public policy, right? So we're seeing in the U.S. the Advanced Clean Truck Program, which started in California, has now been adopted by 7 states, is really critical to making sure that fleets have access to the vehicles that they need. Right, I was just out in Indianapolis last week at the Work Truck Show, which is a large conference for vocational vehicles. Right, all the major manufacturers are there. 2019, there were no EVs on the floor, right? Now there are scores of models out there, and there are Mack just unveiled a big Class 6 box truck or dump truck, and that's really all driven by policy like the Advanced Clean Truck Rule. And then we're also seeing, as Ben had noted, the importance of the IRA, right, which is pulling forward that business case by 4 or 5 years in many applications. The second insight I want to share is it's really critical that fleet leaders are at the table to design policies that work for them. We do a lot of work in New York State. New York has long been a leader in having purchase incentives and charging incentives for medium heavy duty vehicles, and they lag far behind California for actual vehicles on the road. And one of the big challenges there is that the charging incentives that the state has had have not really worked for fleets. So EDF, along with CalSTART and NACV, have pulled together a group of fleets called the Electric Fleet Readiness Group, and these are a dozen fleet leaders who are running mostly Class 8, tractor trailer over the road trucks, from having a couple to having upwards of 100. We pulled them together and worked with them to articulate what do fleets need in utility programs. Right, and then we brought them to, meet with policymakers in New York, and to talk about, again, like what are the key characteristics of that fleets need in utility programs, and we're pretty excited to see that New York is getting ready to move forward on a new proceeding to develop a new generation of infrastructure programs with a focus on truck and bus electrification. And we're optimistic that it's going to be better because fleets are already engaged. And then I guess the third insight is just the real critical importance of best practice sharing and peer-to-peer learning, right? And so we've pulled together the Fleet Electrification Solution Center. It's an online resource to help fleets take the next step in their electrification journey. And we posted that in October, worked a lot with CalSTART to get some really great resources out there, grabbed resources from a lot of other places too. And we're hearing from large fleets and small fleets of how really beneficial that is. And then I guess in the second part of your question is like, what does that mean globally? EDF's in the process now of doing a assessment of how to scale these vehicles globally. We've been working with Ricardo, and we have a report that's going to be coming out probably mid-May, and happy to talk with folks about that. I think what we're seeing is that those three conditions are the underlying conditions in all geographies, right? We need to have access to the vehicles, where we need that business case, and we need the charging. But we're also seeing that how you go about actually securing those conditions can vary quite widely, right? And it may be kind of one question, just to kind of reflect back on the last panel. And we were talking about India and talking about, I think it was 5 or 10K buses, right? And the fleets were demanding that, but that there wasn't and there was a need to go beyond that, right? But there wasn't a policy driver that's going to, drive that scale. And I guess I'd want to maybe contrast that a little bit to Europe, right, where we have a proposed CO2 standard, right, and again here in the U.S., where the EPA is getting ready to move forward on a greenhouse gas standard, and seeing that as being a really important policy driver for bringing these vehicles to scale. So thank you.
Thanks, Jason. A number of good elements, at least, that I can sort of relate to, right? The readiness, the availability of the technology, regulation as a strong incentive and a much needed sort of driver, and then indeed sort of bringing everyone to the table and sharing the lessons and basically do it. And the striking thing is at least that the readiness is there, right? Maybe a couple of years back, I mean, that's what I observe. We would even sort of maybe have discussions like, is the technology ready? I think now we're more in the operational domain, like how do we apply it and what does that imply? And can we sort of tailor make that? So that's a big improvement. So thanks for that. Maybe on that note, sort of, I'd like to turn to Jess, my partner in ambition, I should say. She told me, don't call me partner in crime. So I'm sorry, Jess. She works with CalSTART. CalSTART has a lot of experience, not only driving the global MOU, but Jess will tell you more about that. And she's been observing, I think, market developments over a longer time as institutions. So Jess, I was very curious to hear sort of how you see the market developments and what sort of, based on what you see sort of shaping up in the market, how you look at the future and what the future holds for us in a way.
Yeah, great. Important questions, Herman. First, I'd like to say a little bit of CalSTART. Because I think it's sort of indicative of where we are in this transition right now. CalSTART is a 30-year-old organization. So for 30 decades, we have been bringing stakeholders to the table, technology developers, users, the fleets, the manufacturers, to see if we can't find cleaner solutions for transportation. And I've joined CalSTART a year ago. 3 years ago, we were 30 people. We are now 150 people and still growing. And I think that really speaks to the sort of shift we're seeing in the demand for these conversations, for this work towards not just developing the solutions. I think maybe across the board we have the solutions. We just need to figure out how to implement them on the infrastructure side, on the supply chain side. You know, Herman, you talked about we've got the vehicles. Yeah, the vehicles are there. Now we've got to figure out what happens when a fleet owner puts an order in for vehicles, 100 of them show up, and the utility goes, see you in 3 years when we can get power to your site. Those are the kind of challenges that CalSTART is really organized to help address and carry forward. A few other things I just wanted to note, and I think it's probably been said on every panel that's occurred here today, but the importance of the U.S. Leadership in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act cannot be overstated. This is literally billions of dollars going into the clean transportation space to address a lot of these challenges. And actually, Jason, an EDF report, I'm surprised you didn't want to highlight it. I'll do your job for you. Don't worry about that. Was released today, which I think gives some really exciting numbers around the level of private sector investment that these two landmark pieces of legislation in the U.S. are bringing to the table. $120 billion in private sector investment over the last 8 years, but 70% of that has come since the passage and enactment of these two critical pieces of legislation. I think that should tell you maybe more than CalSTART's growth and employment numbers a bit about the rapid expansion and acceleration of this zero emission transportation market for medium and heavy duties and vehicles in particular. Jason also mentioned the other side of this coin that's really important. So, you know, those two pieces of legislation really important on sort of the writ large incentive side, right? Government subsidies, government direct funding in form of grants, tax incentives, et cetera, really important. But that alone will not get us to a zero emission transportation future. We also need the market signal in the form of regulations. Good regulations, strong regulations, regulations that do take into account the needs of fleets, the purchasers, the consumers, the needs of utilities, how are we going to get power to that site, the needs of infrastructure providers and developers. We're going to do hydrogen in some sites. You know, I think it was said on the last panel, I'll say it here today, for some of our largest vehicles, battery electric, battery swapping, those sorts of technologies might not work. We might need hydrogen. How are we going to partner with, for example, other sectors in stationary manufacturing that are definitely going to be going towards hydrogen as a zero emission solution? How do we bring those stakeholders to the table to figure out how to make that work? And regulation is one way to do that, to level the playing field, to say all of the market actors have to meet this standard, have to meet this goal, target, mandate, have to comply with it. That is the most certain way to bring private sector investment to the table, to get companies thinking and planning and justifying investments in this transition, doing the hard work of this transition. Money is one thing. A market signal, knowing you're going to be on the same page as your competitors, is another, and it's really important. The other thing I wanted to mention was around the global MOU that we co-lead with the Netherlands. And I think this really highlights, again, just the enormous shift in attention to this transition. We launched the global MOU just barely 2 years ago at COP26. We now have 27 countries signed up to an ambition around 100% new sales of medium heavy-duty vehicles being zero emission by 2040. This is a tremendously ambitious target. We have the US signed up to that. We have the UK signed up to that. We have Ukraine signed up to that for maybe somewhat obvious reasons. But all these countries are coming together on a regular basis. CalSTART and the Netherlands are convening these countries to talk about all of these challenges, to share information about how we're going to make this transition work. It's going to take all of us together doing that. And so I'm just really excited to be here to share that all with you. Would love to learn from you all what you're doing to make this transition work where you are. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Yes, also to highlight again, I think that that combination of market signal investments and the sort of the operational security pointing to the, at least to the infrastructure needs as well, and how much is going on in the US. And I think also maybe from my side as an outsider to the US in a way, what I very much like, and maybe I can encourage you to take a look at it, is if you're in need of a very short, nice video somewhere later tonight when you don't know what to do and start to miss all the transportation discussions. You know, the US has, as a whole of government approach, have recently launched a blueprint on transportation decarbonization that stretches from active mobility to zero emission freight and the infrastructure related sort of things. And in the video, you can find it on YouTube. I think it's a very nice way to portray that whole government approach. And I think it was very upbeat, and it's very great sort of to see that blueprint come out in this country. So, and, you know, moving maybe from you know, from that perspective of a whole government approach, but maybe not as a whole government approach, but maybe as a whole system approach, you know, we're talking about freight transportation. Of course, there was a lot of emphasis now on road transportation, but we're going to turn to Francois now, because he represents maybe another important way to transport freight, which is by rail. So maybe, and I'd like to understand more and better, Francois, because you've been working on this very long. So how could sort of how can rail contribute to zero emission freight transportation, and what can we do to accelerate that role and maybe to integrate that role? We already had a pre-talk to be transparent, Francois and I, where we said, well, maybe we're still thinking too much in different silos, freight, road, et cetera, et cetera. So what can we do sort of to move ahead on those issues?
Well, so thank you very much for this question. So, well, I think that rail has been a little bit phantomatic in this session of transforming transport. It's relatively strange because actually we are already an electric mode of transport, because electrification of rail is, well, at least in Europe, almost completed. It's also quite the case in some of the countries of the Middle East. And for your surprise, perhaps, when you are speaking about diesel locomotive, you are speaking, in fact, about hybrid locomotive, because the engine is electric. And the diesel is only there for producing electricity. And, well, it's some kind of joke, but it's not really a joke. For instance, if you take a country where the electricity is made by coal, and as you know, having electricity by coal, you have a huge deperdition of energy. It's even better to have a diesel locomotive where you are producing directly the electricity on the locomotive than to use, for instance, hydrogen or batteries. That's just for the sake of clarity. So there is a lot of physical evidence that make rail the most energy effective mode of transport. And if we are speaking, I'm always a little bit amused by the expression zero emission, because if an electric truck is zero emission, I think an electric locomotive under catenaries is a negative emission or something like that, if you compare the energy emission. So I would like just, it's a little bit of a joke, but if you look to the figures, not really a joke. For instance, in Europe, for freight on rail is 17% of the whole modal transport, and in 0.5% of the emissions. So that means that it's completely residual. And I think what is really important is to have that in mind. That means that, well, we are creating new technology for having almost zero emission trucking industry. But what we need to do is to change the paradigm, is to change the system. We need really to have a system that globally is more frugal, is consuming less energy, and is bringing more services to the people. I will just make a little detour about what did happen during COVID-19. Everybody discovered that freight people were there because, very simply, for moving 50 wagons, which are equivalent for 50 trucks, you need only one driver. And at a time where everybody was stuck by the COVID-19 restriction, well, in fact, rail freight was not touched really very much by the restriction due to COVID, and part of the essential furniture were provided by rail. What I mean by that is that what we need to think in terms of freight development globally, road and rail freight, is on more complementarity. To say the truth, in the last years, there have been more or less, depending the region anyway, a decrease of the modal share of rail freight, but mainly because the economic position of rail freight was not that good, just because, and that's quite known, rail is paying all the externalities, where for road, it's not the case. You have a lot of, still today, a lot of negative externalities that you are not paying for. So that means that there is a huge debate, that mainly in European debates, but that's also the case in other countries, how to have those negative externalities coming back to rail that are really positive externality to the climate. Well, I will not really enter into that today, but I think that something that is really important in the conversation, that we need to find a way to have those positive externality to foster recourse to rail freight. And for a more operational point of view, the question that we have ahead of us is to have a modal shift to rail, and for that we need to have a better internal efficiency at the rail freight level, and that's what we are struggling for. And I think part of the financing that we have been speaking about should also go to rail. That will be really important if we want, on the long run, to really decarbonize the economy. Thank you.
Thanks. Francois, very clear messages on how to move and to advance on that part of, let's say, freight transportation. So maybe we can sort of hear some further reflections, either online or from people on the floor. And I turn to Christoph. Christoph, you're working as CEO of the Smart Freight Center and doing a lot of sort of freight work. And in my shorthand introduction, I said, you know, the technology is around the corner in a very cost competitive sort of way. And yet at the same time, of course, we have an investment sort of barrier to overcome. So, and I was just wondering if you could sort of reflect maybe on those sort of two dimensions. How do you see the development in terms of the costs and the competitiveness of zero emission technology and vehicles, total cost of ownership, and yet maybe at the same time, while it is around the corner, why do we then still have a finance gap, and what can be done to overcome that?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm happy to get to those questions. Let me first say a few words how we are coming to this whole table here, and thanks for having us as neighbors in Holland and also partners in ambition in the ZEF-wise journey, so which we put together. And it's a, I mean, we basically say it's a journey this year. So every year that we are looking at in this decade needs to see an inflection. Yeah, so we need to actually move. So the idea of this ZEF-wise is basically to say, okay, we're starting with transforming transport. We get together again at the Smart Freight Week in Amsterdam with the Smart Freight Center. We get together then at ITF, we get together at SAMS, etc. And we want every time, yeah, to raise the insights and also the shared insights. So we put together this group, a paper financing the transition to electric trucks. It builds on many great things that, for example, EDF, CalStart, and others actually put together. And we get to financing as a key barrier. So I have actually this with me. You will see it's on the websites of all of us. Yeah, so the Dutch government, CalStart, ourselves, and it's a start. Yeah, so that's one. So I already shared earlier today, so we come from a different angle, but we are coming to the same point. So we are starting with the shippers. I mean, the Smart Freight Center is actually brings together shippers globally who want to decarbonize their supply chain, Scope 3. Yeah. So when they do this, and they all have most of them have net zero 2050 targets. They are aligned with the science-based targets. If you calculate backwards what actually aligning with the science-based targets means, then actually the latent demand for electric trucks in road freight is huge. Yeah, so it's huge. Yeah, and with all of this, what we said so far, if you ask the OEMs how much volume is being ordered from them, it's like 20 here, 30 there. I mean, there's a huge gap between what needs to happen policy will make a huge difference. I mean, I don't have to debate that. So policy is key. But policy alone will not do it. And I think we should lay out a little bit about what needs to happen actually, and we will be on this journey. Now, you asked about technology and TCO. So indeed, the freight sector is very much commercially driven. Yeah. So other than the passenger cars, yeah, it's for fun partially, or for utility. The commercial vehicles are TCO based. Now, the TCO is largely driven by battery cost. Yeah, so if you look at the cost per kilowatt hour, like it's like a semiconductor type of ramp down. So 10 years ago, it was like at $800, $1,000 per kilowatt. Now we thought actually it would be at 25, at 100. With the current criticality of battery materials and the price volatility for some of those, we may reach that in 2030. And you ask the TCO shift in some of the use cases, the heavy, basically the ones that are on the lower battery range, the light duty, basically vehicles. The use case is there, the TCO is there today. Yeah, so the TCO is positive. Yeah, so it's not about the TCO; it's about other things. We get to those. Yeah, but the heavier I think Jason said that already. Yeah, the heavier the truck goes, the TCO will be more challenging. But it's a matter of a few years, and it's a use case. It's about the regional distribution, or it's a line haul. Yeah. So the TCO largely depends on the battery cost and etc. So now I very much agree with. It's basically the barriers then are about technology adoption, and then there is about infrastructure, because infrastructure and basically market adoption needs to be in parallel, also regionally in parallel. And then it's about finance, and I think we get to that in more questions. The one big barrier about this sector is it's good to work with the big fleets, but unfortunately this is a very much fragmented, in many areas informal sector of owner operators, which do not have actually the access to finance in order to move the switch. But I'm sure we get to that.
Thanks, Christoph, for laying that out. And I can sort of recommend that it's not because the Netherlands was one of the co-authors to this, but I can recommend reading the paper, because that's really meant to be the framing paper for the investment part of the ZEP5 series. So, laying out maybe the issues that we aim to tackle throughout this year, as Christoph outlined. So then maybe last but certainly not least, I think in many ways when sort of discussing the transition, of course, it is often said, we need to have a technology neutral approach, so you don't sort of discriminate against any of the technologies. Hydrogen then often, of course, comes into the discussion for its role it could play. So I'd be very keen, Zhang Zhen, as director of the China EV100 Hydrogen Center, maybe first of all, what is the current best practice of application of hydrogen energy in the transportation sector in China, and what is your roadmap basically guiding those developments?
Thank you, moderator. Okay, China EV100 is an independent third-party think tank and a promotion platform in new energy vehicles in China. And it's my honor to have the opportunity to share some practice and latest progress in the new energy truck, especially in the hydrogen FCV. As we all know, China announces carbon peak by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2060 is a very challenging schedule for China. And for the best practice, I think last year we know China held the Winter Olympics, and the Winter Olympics has boosted the application of hydrogen FCV in China. More than 1,000 FCV has been applied in 3 competition turns of the event, along with more than 30 hydrogen stations, and making the largest more a demonstration of FCV in the history of Olympics. And also after the event, these hydrogen FCVs have been used to serve tourist and corporate shuttles. And for China China is doing a lot of efforts to actively promote the hydrogen FCV. So last year in China, you know, the market nowadays is driven by the strong government policy. Last year, China unveiled the country's first medium to long-term plan of hydrogen industry. Also, China rolled out a large-scale regional demonstration to promote the technology upgrading and application of hydrogen FCV. So by 2022, is 5,009 FCVs were registered in China, and the cumulative stock of hydrogen FCV is more than 13,000, accounting to almost 20% of the total number worldwide. Under the national plan of hydrogen industry, China's target is to have around 50,000 FCVs by 2025.
It's an ambitious roadmap and sort of, I think, great progress as well. So thanks for sharing that.
Okay, I also want to add some information about the other technical route, the truck, the new truck with a battery exchange. As Chris Fong mentioned, the TCO. Yeah, the TCO is very important. So China's action is that the truck with battery exchange is also increased very rapidly. And the total market about the new electric truck is 25,000 last year, and half of them is truck with battery exchange. So I think the truck with battery exchange, the economic is very good because you can buy the truck without battery. So that means that the next truck is very cheaper than the diesel truck, and you can rent the battery. And the mining fee of the renting battery is also very cheaper than the diesel fuel.
Yep. No, thanks for bringing out that track, because I think it's an interesting development, maybe indeed as part of that operational security and the TCO, to see how that plays out. It could be a very positive sort of development, although at the same time battery costs are coming down. So it's interesting to see how over years to come that will play out, sort of what of those options works out best, I think. What I would like to do is, maybe I'm looking at the online moderator, there's no questions online, so thanks. Maybe I'm sort of like to turn to the audience to see if there is any questions from the floor. Please.
Good afternoon. I'm Franz Stries-Gross, Director of Infrastructure in West Africa at the World Bank. I have a question for Ms. Zhang Zhao. Take us forward 10 years. You see the cost of electric vehicles coming down, especially the light duty, but you also have the hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Who will dominate what market segment? In other words, in 2030, do you think that the heavy-duty trucks, the mining trucks, the diesel locomotives, etc., will be replaced by fuel cell equivalents of that? Can fuel cells compete with electric vehicles in the midsection of the market? How do you see the economics between these two essentially competing technologies, the hydrogen fuel cells versus battery electric vehicles? Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. And we have started the economic point time. And to trust the electric truck and the hydrogen fuel truck. And to be honest, the electric electric truck will be it will be more economic first, especially it will gain the economics nowadays. And the hydrogen is still very expensive nowadays. For example, 4910 truck with hydrogen is almost 20 US dollars. Nowadays in China, almost 3 times of diesel truck. But it can be more economic to by 2025. And to 2025, the economic will equal with the electric truck. But it will still by 2030, the economic level can be equals to the diesel truck. So I think by 2030, and the hydrogen FCV can really realize the economics. Nowadays, it is still can't compare with the electric truck. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I'm sort of mindful of the time because I think we've got 10 minutes left. So what I would like to do is I'd like to sort of return maybe to the panel, maybe, and that's going to be, as far as I'm concerned, a 1 minute each. Sort of, you know, we have the ZEFY series, you know, the sort of the stop at the end of the year clearly will be COP28. And we'll have that drum beat, right? That's why we have this series, sort of, you know, to deliver a package of action to COP. If there would be one thing, and Sam is in between, Sam and India, I think, which is also very, very important, I think, meeting from this perspective. If you could sort of put one thing on the action agenda or on the political radar at one of those two events, what would be on your wish list? Jason.
Big question. You know, I guess I would think about your partner in crime here and the MOU that you all have, ambition, right? And the ambition, right, which is really fantastic, and just making sure that the member states are recognizing the need to be investing early and often in the grid and infrastructure side in order to meet that ambition.
Jason stole my answer because it's the right answer. This is the thing we have to unlock. If we could get utilities and folks who are involved in helping to get more, not only plan more generation, but get it on the grid to the table in a meaningful, dedicated way, we are going to unlock so much investment so quickly.
Well, that will be also ambition, and perhaps to not have too much, let's say, global north-centric approach for all those questions. You have a lot of countries where there are huge investment in railways because they don't have the backbone for this kind of mobility. For instance, in the US, about 50% of the freight is by rail because you have the infrastructure. So in Africa, they need to build a rail freight infrastructure. In India, they need to modernize their rail freight infrastructure. So never forget that rail is today the zero carbon electric mobility. So we need to invest in rail.
Yeah, two things. So indeed, for the infrastructure deployment, the models around the world are different. So I think the US is a utility central model. So for example, if you go to Europe, the big OEMs, Volvo, Traton, and Daimler, basically are building a trans-European charging infrastructure network for fast chargers for heavy duty. Yeah? So that's a somewhat different model. Yeah. So I think we need to be mindful of obviously the grid looks different. And then the second thing is, and too bad we can't get to that, but that's probably by the time, Herman, we are at COP. Yeah. So we will have cut through that because I said it's the informal sector. So the scaling, I mean, there aren't always big fleets. I mean, US is specific because there are large fleets. In many other countries, there aren't large fleets, yeah? And the shippers don't have large fleets. Yeah? They subcontract to actually an informal sector. And I think we need to find the right financing instruments in order to address that.
Thank you. I think today we still face many challenges. Not only the infrastructure is not well developed, especially for the new energy truck, but also I think the source of carbon emission is not only the electric, but the hydrogen is still very high. And so we have to face such challenges. And I think it's very important for us to strengthen the international cooperation to build a global resilient supply chain through technical progress and mutual accepted standards of green and hydrogen. Thank you.
Thanks to the panel. I see still two gentlemen sort of probably wanting to ask a question. Let me check the time. I think we've got 7 more minutes. So if it's a very brief question, maybe to one panelist, I think we can accommodate 2, because I would need 2 minutes to give you a message and wrap it up. So
I'll let you all decide who answers, but biggest technical myth or regulatory reality that is not well understood that needs to change for the acceleration to happen?
You want to know which one that is, what the biggest myth is?
Well, we've heard that there's technical,
yep,
and we've heard that there's regulatory. So either there's a regulatory reality, maybe that's holding back grid investment, or there's a technology opportunity that is not understood or appreciated that regulators need to jump on top of. Which one would you speak to, and how would that change the transportation transformation to accelerate?
Anyone who's ready to answer that question?
I don't know if it's a myth, but I think the infrastructure barriers, and by that I mean getting more electrons on the grid and getting them to where they're going to be in demand, I think is often cited as a reason why we shouldn't have regulations. And I would say, actually, it's the opposite. We should have regulations so that we can get the many decision makers involved in that. This is particularly in the US, but I think it would apply to other jurisdictions as well. Folks who are not normally engaged in the deployment of transportation infrastructure to the table with the transportation community to figure out how we go forward rapidly.
Thanks, Jess. What I would like to do, and so, yeah, there's one other response, please.
No, I will be very brief. I think one of also very important question is to promote modal shift to rail freight. That's one of the objectives of the European Union. They want to double the modal share of rail by 2030, and I think it's absolutely credible in Europe. And for that, there is always the question of the level playing field and of the externalities. We need to tackle this issue.
Thanks, Francois. There was one question online.
Okay, we got an online question that is from Dr. Shakija Lahore from University of Stanford University, and based on learning of rich economics, what can developing countries like Pakistan that cannot give much incentives can do to enhance adoptions of EV buses?
Good. Who has a 1-minute question to this very elaborate?
I think Christoph was talking about the report that they had done on the financing. I'd say, maybe look at the best practices there.
Christoph, 1 minute.
Well, especially if you talk Pakistan, and I think it was mentioned by Pavan Mulukutla earlier, so was a very successful e-bus tender. I think Mahua Acharya is in the room who actually helped to manage that, and it was standardization of the requirement. It was top down. It was actually it was a competitive tender, and with a significant volume. So the governance was there in order to do that. It's not trivial. I can say we're currently exploring if it applies to trucks as well. So it's and then I think the result was that the offers came in that were at the upfront cost lower than diesel buses. Yeah, so I mean that speaks for itself. So why shouldn't Pakistan should do the same thing?
Thanks, Christoph. I think it's time to wrap up, and I'm really sorry for that, but I'm under very strict sort of time orders. Already see the sort of the text sort of coming up, and I'd like to conclude, although it's not a conclusion, right? Hopefully you feel encouraged sort of to join with that series. So do come and pick up the leaflet about that, and maybe my shorthand, and it's very sort of maybe not to give you slogans, but maybe my shorthand summary of this is also to get back to that question: is it a regulatory sort of paradigm that we need to step in, or a technology one? My sort of observation is that maybe a couple of years back, freight transportation was seen as a very hard to abate sector. I think by now we know technology-wise it's ready to abate. That doesn't mean the truth is out there, right? You can see the trucks. If you go to a Carlstar truck show, you can see it. So, and that's great, right? So the technology is there. It's becoming cost competitive. It's not a done deal. So we need to do a lot of things that we started to discuss. So I think we are in that sort of probably in the domain of getting the policies right, getting the incentives right, and making sure that the operational security is out there for those who have to sort of drive the trucks. And that sort of really also points to that infrastructure dimension, because otherwise without it nothing moves, literally. And maybe then one last message, and just to be clear, right, in case you forgot who the partners were to the ZEFY series. So the following message has been approved by them. So it's Drive to Zero, the World Bank, the Smart Freight Center, the Government of the Netherlands, Carlstar, the Electric Vehicle Initiative, the World Business Council, ICCT, and UNEP. So they will sort of they are our partners along that sort of this series. And I think maybe a message on behalf of them, and thanking the panel first and foremost, thanking you for listening and joining, and maybe one message on behalf of all of them: if you go out there, be ZEF-wise. Thank you.